want to do just a relatively brief, for me, midweek update to address some issues that I touched on Sunday a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of flesh them out a little bit more, mainly about Saudi Arabia, ESG, and the Abraham Accords. This is, I think, going to be an increasingly significant issue, and I just want to give you some thoughts that I have on the way a lot of these things are fitting together. There's a lot going on in the Middle East right now. For example, Syria and Russia were conducting joint air patrols yesterday with live fire exercises over the Golan Heights, not across the Israeli border, but on the Golan Heights. That's the first time they've done that with live fire abilities. Also, there was in the area of the Golan Heights, there was an Israeli tank or tanks that attacked a Syrian army outpost there. They also dropped some flyers saying you guys should be doing this in the Golan Heights demilitarized zone. So that's a kind of significant thing, and we'll talk more about that on Sunday. But one of the things I want to do is I personally think that the Psalm 83 is a prophecy that relates to the end times, at least so far as it sets up a condition of these countries surrounding Israel, the people surrounding Israel in the end times in their attitudes. And I think that when you add those attitudes that we read about in Psalm 83, and you can look it up and read it for yourself, that those attitudes are underlying the Abraham Accords, which causes me some concern. I mean, we all want peace, we all want prosperity, we all want things to work out well, but I'm concerned about the way the Abraham Accords may lead to more, particularly the fact that they seem to be focused in the initial stages now, since Trump brought them in, they seem to be focused on economic component, the heavy economic component. And we know that this is part of end-time Bible prophecy, that this economic thing will be a big deal. We read about that in Revelation 13 and elsewhere. So that's sort of the basis right now of the Abraham Accords. So I'm going to go through some things that are going on, a little bit brief history of Saudi Arabia, the current crown prince, some things that I think tie the oil crisis, the increase in prices, gas, in part to what's going on in Saudi Arabia, or what Saudi Arabia has been doing and laying a foundation. So hopefully we'll be able to get through this pretty quickly. This is from the Daily Sabah. This is a newspaper published in Turkey. It is a Turkish mouthpiece. And this is how they, at least Erdogan, one of his official publications, mouthpiece publications, views the Abraham Accords. Now, this is being kind of a big deal right now. The Saudis are expanding their talks with Israel. I'm going to explain why in this video. The Biden administration has gotten involved. Biden was supposed to make a trip to Israel in June this month. I'm recording this in June of 2022. That looks like that's been put off until at least July. Part of that is because I think the presidents don't like to go unless they have things in place to make a big announcement. They just don't want to go for a visit. They want to go because it accomplishes something for them. And right now, there's a couple of factors. One, I don't think they have these agreements in place to the extent that Saudi Arabia needs to be involved. It's clear, though, that the Biden administration would like to normalize things with the Saudis, and I think part of that has to do with the increase in the price of gas, a disruption in the world supply of gas and oil that's causing prices to go up. I mean, you can just go drive by any gas station here in the U.S. and you can see that gas prices are up. And this is pretty much the case everywhere you go. Now, there's some other reasons for that, and I'll discuss those in this update. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to bring the Biden administration into these. The Biden administration is trying to get the Saudis and the Israelis to make an agreement, and they'll view this as a great diplomatic, this will be a great diplomatic thing that they'll want to celebrate. So, so here's, for example, here's an article from the Wall Street Journal on Tuesday, a couple days ago. It says this: although Saudi Arabia doesn't recognize Israel and has no diplomatic relations with its neighbor, the kingdom is expanding its secretive talks with Israeli leaders that could reshape Middle East politics and end decades of enmity between two of the region's most influential nations. And I think that's probably a misstatement, as I think they're the region's two most influential nations in the Middle East right now. And there's a reason for Israel and Saudi Arabia to want to get together, because they have this problem with Iran. I mean, there's a lot going on with Iran. I'll talk more about that on Sunday. So here's what else the Wall Street Journal article says. With the Biden administration's help, Saudi Arabia and Israel are trying to broker an agreement that could give commercial planes expanded rights to fly from Israel over the kingdom and pave the way for Saudi Arabia to take full control of two strategic Red Sea islands, according to people familiar with the efforts. And I'm going to explain to you how that all fits together. Now, just to give you a little bit of context on this, the Wall Street Journal article also goes on to say the Saudi government is making the moves as it sees support growing among its public for ties with Israel. On a recent visit to Washington, Saudi Prince Khalid bin Salman, the son of Saudi King Salman and brother of the kingdom's de facto ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who we refer to as MBS, privately told people that recent polling showed a decisive shift, especially among Saudis under 30 years old, in favor of diplomatic relations with Israel, according to people briefed on the talks. While official diplomatic relations may still be years away, the series of secret political, military, and economic steps could accelerate long-building efforts to end the conflict between two countries that see a shared threat in Iran, according to people involved in the efforts. The Saudi-Israeli talks are a key element in efforts to repair strained ties between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, as the Biden administration begins to embrace former President Donald Trump's push to build ties between Israel and the Arab world without waiting for an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. So this is all really a pretty big deal, the way this is all coming together. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about Neom here. King Ibn Saud, he came to power, or the Saudi kingdom was formed in 1932. Since the Saudi kingdom was formed in 1932, all of the kings of Saudi Arabia have been sons of King Abdulaziz ibn Saud. He ruled Saudi Arabia from its founding in 1932, and you have to remember that there was tribal conflict going on. The Saudi tribe was supported by the British back in World War I. They were able to take over the areas of Mecca and Medina and throw out the Hashemite tribe, which had ruled Mecca and Medina, the holy places of Islam, for about, I think, 700 years. So there was a bunch of agreements that were signed, the Sykes-Picot Agreement and other treaties that were signed after World War I that gave the Hashemite kingdom certain areas. But from 1932 to 1953, Ibn Saud ruled Saudi Arabia. He died in 1953, and then he has been succeeded as king by a number of his sons. Ibn Saud was born in 1876. He was about 6'8", is my understanding. He was quite an impressive thing, and he essentially went to Riyadh when they started to really make their move, and he and about 40 to 60 men climbed over palm trees into the walled city of Riyadh and took it over. And then eventually were able to expand out and take over the entire country. Things changed in 1938, though, when a little thing called oil was discovered in Saudi Arabia. Now Saudi Arabia is one of the most, has next to Venezuela, has the biggest oil reserves on planet Earth. So right now, all of the kings of Saudi Arabia have been sons. Most of the sons have come from what they call the Sudahari Seven. Sudahari was one of Ibn Saud's wives. He had many wives and concubines. I believe he had 22 wives. A lot of those wives were with heads of various Arabian tribes around the Arabian Peninsula to make political alliances. Currently, King Salman is king. There's a tradition in Saudi Arabia that you really respect what the king wants to do. So, for example, in this discussion that is going on in Washington and D.C., there appears to be a belief among younger Saudis that why do we need the Palestinians anymore? Why do we mess around with the Palestinians? But King Salman, who is the current king, he's, I think, 86 now, not in very good health, pretty frail. He's not the de facto ruler. That's Mohammed bin Salman. But he is very tied to the Palestinian issue. So when you see Saudi pronouncements on things related to further relationship with Israel, they always will couch it in terms of we've got to get the Palestinian thing solved first before we go too far. I don't know that that's where Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is, but as long as the king is alive, they will respect his position. But that will change quickly when the king dies. An example would be King Salman. In the prior king, that would be King Abdullah, who ruled from 2005 to 2015. King Abdullah had appointed a favorite of his as the crown prince. And the way he constructed it was the crown prince would become the king, and nobody could do anything to change it. But when he died, King Salman came in and appointed somebody else to be the crown prince. He appointed Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed. This was in 2015. This was like 3 months after King Abdullah had died. This was not the person that King Abdullah had wanted to be the crown prince. So he respected, I think, King Salman, who had effectively become the ruler too because of health problems of King Abdullah. I mean, these guys are all old. Some of them have had strokes. Some of them have not been able to serve. But they put the king up as a figurehead. But King Salman respected his choice. But as soon as he was dead, within a few months, he promotes Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed to become the crown prince. But then in 2017, he appointed Mohammed bin Salman as crown prince. It's his favorite son. He's one of his younger sons. Of course, you can do the ages. Mohammed bin Salman is 37 years old right now. So his father was about 50 when he was born. And this is the way the king. So this will be a big change in Saudi Arabia too. This is why they're maybe doing polling internally, as you saw in that Wall Street Journal article, to find out what the younger Saudis want, because this will be the first generation of a Saudi king, or the first generation other than the son. So it will be the first grandson of Ibn Saud to come to the throne. And there's been a lot of intrigue and that type of thing going on. So there was a relationship. You know, the Ottoman Empire used to control Mecca and Medina. But it was controlled by the Hashemite tribe. Hashemite tribe. This is King Abdullah of Jordan. They were given Jordan and Iraq and Syria as, I guess, sort of a consolation prize when everything was being changed by the British back in the 20s and 30s. And the Sauds took over the bulk of the Arabian Peninsula, with the exception of Yemen, and then the areas of Qatar, and now what's the United Arab Emirates and Oman down in the southeast corner of the Arabian Peninsula. So, and there's been some intrigue in Jordan. Jordan's had some internal problems right now. But when if you remember back in May of 2017, we were actually in Israel when this took place, and we were there when Trump came after his trip to Saudi Arabia. You remember he met with King Salman and Mohammed bin Salman, and he had Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump and his wife, and they went to this Saudi security center, and they did this kind of very weird thing of grabbing this glowing orb. But so this, and Trump then put in place things like he did the Abraham Accords. Then he quickly came out with the his peace plan for the Middle East. That came out right at the time when this Charlie Vector thing hit the United States very badly and everything started to unwind. But he came out with a peace plan that, I don't care how you read that peace plan, it would have divided Israel. It would have allowed a Palestinian state, very reduced in size, but it would have allowed a Palestinian state and a Jewish state. It allowed for capital. I don't think it was really in Jerusalem as we would think of Jerusalem. It was just outside in the next to Jerusalem. But nevertheless, this was a big thing, and so Trump, this was one of the things he wanted to do. He moved the U.S. embassy to Israel, which had been part of U.S. law for many years, but nobody else had done. Now, I want to talk to you about a few things. I mentioned that this is about ESG and the Abraham Accords and what's happening. So, by royal decree, starting in 2017, they had a meeting of a think tank institute in Riyadh. They have this big conference. They have it every year called the FII Institute. It's called the Future Investment Innovation Institute. And one of the things that this institute has been pushing is ESG. Talk about that in a moment. For example, they're having a conference this year, and it's called Investing in Humanity, Enabling a New World Order. This will be the 6th meeting that they've had. And one of the things that they're pushing through these FII conferences held in Riyadh is this thing called ESG. Now, this is taking over corporate America. I just went to a legal seminar a week ago, or last week, and one of the panels at the seminar was talking about ESG, which stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance. And it's a way to score corporations. So the FII has been really one of the leaders in putting out things. Now, this is an FII Institute publication regarding ESG investing in emerging markets, because emerging markets, they have trouble. They don't have the ability, they don't have the electrical grid and that type of thing that we have here in the West and other developed parts of the world. So that it's hard for them. They have to put in place, electrical generating plants and that sort of thing, which hurts their ESG scores. But this is a very big thing. The FII Institute has a big section on their website that is tied to putting out information for corporations around the world on ESG principles, how they are to be implemented, how things are to be scored, and that sort of thing. So it's interesting that so they have the founding partner, vision partner, and then strategic partners for this FII Institute. And you'll see that the founding partner is the Public Investment Fund of the Saudi Arabian Kingdom. That's important. You'll also see that they have strategic partners like Bank of New York Mellon, HSBC, SoftBank, other big corporate things. And then but the Strategic Investment Fund, now this is the investment fund that's sort of led to some congressional investigations and a bunch of articles in the Washington Post and New York Times and Wall Street Journal. Here's one from the New York Times back in April. And it says, before giving billions to Jared Kushner, Saudi investment fund had big doubts. Because, of course, former sons-in-laws of presidents are to be, particularly if they're the son-in-law of Donald Trump, are to be investigated for what they're doing after they leave office, as opposed to what, say, Hunter Biden was doing while his father was still in office. I mean, it's just the way the politics go. So there's been calls for investigation. This is, a recent article, Kushner's Saudi deal must be scrutinized to protect U.S. democracy. That's from the Washington Post. Even the Rolling Stone wrote about it. Wonder why Mohammed bin Salman personally intervened to give Jared Kushner $2 billion. Now, this was part of what Kushner had wanted to do under the Abraham Accords. They were setting up an Abraham Fund. It never really got funded, but when Kushner, the presidency changed in January of 2021, Kushner formed a group called the Abraham Accords Peace Institute, and what you see here on the page is a copy of their strategic plan and what they're going to do. And one of the things they're going to do is set up an investment fund and get money from Arab countries to invest in Israel. So, now the House wants to get in and investigate this and that sort of thing. Why is Kushner getting all of this money? And he has raised somewhere around $2.5 to $3 billion, mainly from the United Arab Emirates, which is one of the signatories to the Abraham Accords, and the Saudis, which is not yet, but he's got it from the Strategic Investment Fund, which is one of the founding partners of the Future Investment Innovation Institute, FII Institute, that holds these Davos-type meetings in Riyadh. So there was even the article just last week about, there's a House panel that's now investigating why Kushner got this. They can't investigate Hunter Biden, but they can investigate Jared Kushner. And then one of the other people that is, or other groups that is involved with this is NEOM. And now NEOM is this city. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. But what you'll see is that NEOM brings in some of the things that are involved in ESG just under slightly different names. So you have environmental, social, and governance, and then you have technology, nature, sustainability, livability. And so this Future Investment Initiative has these meetings, and they have goals and that type of thing. And so here's from their first meeting in 2017 in Riyadh. And you'll see, it's very high-tech. It looks very, very much like other summits to take place, like Davos, like the World Government Summit. And in 2017, they called this summit the Pulse of Change. And you can see very high-tech and that sort of thing. Now, and one of the things that they talked about at that first meeting in 2017 was NEOM. This is when NEOM was sort of rolled out to the public. And you can go to see discoverneom.com, and if you want to read about this, and I'll show you some videos about it. And it's really kind of a cool thing. Now, one of the MC of the first meeting of the FII Institute was Maria Bartiromo, whatever her name is, from Fox News, Fox Business. And she interviewed Mohammed bin Salman, and he came and told about his vision. And they had all sorts of people there. Now, it's interesting. This was in 2017. Now, also remember, in context, there were other things going on in the Middle East back in 2017. Back in November of 2017, Hariri, who is the prime minister of Lebanon, went to Saudi Arabia. And while he was in Saudi Arabia, he actually resigned as prime minister. The reason that he resigned as prime minister was he was concerned about his life. He had had death threats from Hezbollah, and so he resigned his post in the Lebanese cabinet. And he said, he was blaming Iran. Iran's really the one that's behind this. And so understand the context of this. He's in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, when he resigns as prime minister of Lebanon. He's a dual Saudi Lebanese citizen. He actually has a home in Riyadh. And the Hariri family is extremely wealthy. They're multi-billionaires. So he resigned, and then the word was that he had actually been detained by Saudi Arabia in connection with Mohammed bin Salman. He had just been appointed as crown prince, and not too long after he became appointed as crown prince, he starts arresting all of these people, important princes, some of the richest people in the world, and they were detained. They were essentially put in jail. It was the Four Seasons in Riyadh and some other cities. So they're luxury hotels, but they were taken over and essentially made jails. And one of the people who was detained during this period of time was Hariri, the prime minister of Lebanon. So Hariri, the word is Hariri and these other princes paid multiple billions of dollars to get out of jail. And the claim was that they were doing this to clean up corruption. They were sort of imposing sanctions on all of these people. So this one prince, he paid, I've heard up to $20 billion. I've heard that Hariri might have paid $6 to $8 billion to get out of jail. What's interesting, though, is that the next year at the second Future Investment Initiative, you saw Hariri coming in. He came in with Mohammed bin Salman. He walked in. You see King Abdullah II of Jordan. You see the head of Dubai. One of the rulers of the United Arab Emirates was there. And on this panel, there was kind of a weird exchange between Hariri and Mohammed bin Salman, where he said, I want you to know that Prime Minister Hariri, and he had gone back into office as prime minister, and Mohammed bin Salman said, I want you to know he's only going to be here for 2 days this time. He's not going to be here. He's such a kidder about this. And they had a good time, laugh, ha, ha, ha about it. But so there's this big crackdown on all of these people. And so there's let's see, so this investment initiative thing does a lot of things. So here's just a little promo video, and this, I believe, comes from the 2018, the second conference, the one you just saw the video of Mohammed bin Salman kidding around, and only way that a crown prince of Saudi Arabia can kid around with a guy he had detained for a couple of weeks. Hariri, by the way, went back to Lebanon, became prime minister for a while, but in the recent elections, he resigned as prime minister. So here's just a little video, sort of a promo video of what's going on at the FII Institute meeting in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in 2018. So this is Mohammed bin Salman speaking. We have war on terrorism. We want to develop Saudi Arabia. Nothing's going to stop us. We're going to be, it's going to be quite a big deal. We have this mountain. We're going to be like this mountain. Our tradition is this mountain. If it turns into soil, then we'll be done as a nation. Until this mountain goes away, we'll still be here.
المملكة العربية السعودية في الخمس سنوات القادمة
سوف تكون مختلفة تماما. إذا نجحنا في الخمس سنوات القادمة سوف تلتحق بنا دول أكثر. سوف تكون اللحظة القادمة في العالم في الشرق الأوسط إن شاء الله. أنا أعتقد أن أوروبا الجديدة هي الشرق الأوسط. هذه حرب السعوديين. هذه حربي. My war personally. ولا أريد أن أفارق الحياة إلا وأرى الشرق الأوسط في مقدمة مصاف في العالم، وأعتقد أن هذا الهدف سوف يتحقق 100%. So that's part of, this is what sort of drives, he's very ambitious, the Saudi prince, he's very, very wealthy, a super rich home. But so one of the things that the FII, Future Investment Initiative Institute, has done is they have put out all of these publications. They must have 75 to 100 of these great PDF publications that you can go to their website and download. But you kind of get a feel for what's important to them. And one of the things that's important to them is ESG, environmental, social, and governance, as it relates to how companies in the world should act. And you also see that, you see here the Rubik's Cube that's made up of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs of the United Nations. And the Saudis, just like the UN, has a 2030 vision. The Saudis announced during these meetings in 2017 and 2018 their 2030 vision. This is the 2030 vision of Mohammed bin Salman. So they have this, for example, they have this big publication that they put out on ESG. It's in our DNA. The FII Institute is a new global nonprofit foundation with an investment arm and one agenda: impact on humanity, global, inclusive, and built on environmental, social, and governance principles, ESG principles. We foster great minds from around the world and turn ideas into the real-world solutions in 5 critical areas: sustainability, healthcare, education, artificial intelligence, and robotics. And so you see here these are their focus areas. And they talk about, why we need to do ESG, how's the world doing on ESG, and one of the things we need to be is we need to be inclusive. And they have this huge slide presentation that you can download, and you can see here that EY, Ernst & Young, big consulting firm, is the one who put together this presentation. So you see here these things about ESG, and there's a lot of criticism of ESG right now. I think it's really undermining corporations. It's not being helpful. Here's one of the principles: disclosure, not performance, drives ratings. So in other words, we'll tell you all these things that we're doing, and we may not be doing very well financially, but we'll get a high ESG score. Essentially what you see is in my view, this is like a social credit score for corporations, and it bleeds over into personal investments. I think Glenn Beck was the first one to point this out, that people at some of the large investment firms like Merrill Lynch that have investment accounts with the firm are actually getting ESG scores on their investment statements, talking about how well they're doing in terms of environmental, social, and governance. And so this is the woke madness that's taken over the world, and this is sort of the name that they give to this coming into corporations to kind of mask exactly what they're doing. And here it says here, this is this EY prepared report. ESG ratings are becoming a preferred choice. This is the social credit system coming into corporations. And they talk about people who are going to ESG. For example, here you see the world's largest asset manager up in the upper left. Pretty sure that's BlackRock. And you'll see at these conferences that, in the most recent conference last year that the FII Institute held in Riyadh, they had a big panel. They had Ray Dalio's, Steve Schwartzman, and Larry Fink, who is the head of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager. They control about $11 trillion. They've also come out with this global infectious disease index, because this is part of the healthcare thing that they're pushing. They have a publication from FII Institute called Preventing the Next Global Pandemic. I hope you're seeing that this seems to be related to some other big conferences and global gatherings that are taking place. For example, here's a thing that they did at the recent, just last year, on the metaverse, talking about how the metaverse is going to be important. They're going to have all these smartphones. Population is growing. People are getting it. There's new digital frontiers. We're moving from, the 7 layers of the metaverse. We're moving from 5G to 6G so we can gather all of this data and everybody can interact and be social. And they talk about 5G, although 5G, I think, is probably, it's just coming in, but it's on its way out. But where will the metaverse take you? And that's one of the things they were talking about. They talk about farming and sustainability. And they have this kind of interesting graphic that shows the 5 areas that they're involved in. And I would say that while this report you see here does focus on investing in emerging markets, it does show that this is a marketing, expand the market ploy that ESG is using. So in some areas, they're calling this greenwashing. We're making everybody believe that we're doing something to protect the environment when in reality we're not. And so They just a couple weeks ago, they had an inclusive ESG for emerging markets conference in London. And so they're going around the world. They also have this digital magic air, bridging the digital divide via 5G and satellites. But 5G is not going to be there. This was a recent talk at Davos.
I think it will go. It will. First of all, it will definitely happen. I was talking about 6G earlier, which is around 2030. I would say that by then, definitely the smartphone as we know it today will not anymore be the usual kind of the most common interface.
Wow.
Many of these things will be built directly into our bodies.
So you see, this was at the recent Davos. This was the CEO. I believe that's the CEO of Nokia, a tech firm. He was talking about what's going to be done. So here's another thing. This is a graphic from one of the videos that they put out from the FII Institute. And see the Saudi Vision 2030, the new Kuwait, Bahrain Economic Vision 2030, Qatar National Vision 2030, UAE Vision 2021, Oman Vision 2040. And these are all countries that sort of fall within this Psalm 83 collection of nations, but they all have this vision thing that's tied to other.
First 3 editions of the Future Investment Initiative.
Now we are one of the top 3 global gatherings.
And so you see he mentions the top 3 global gatherings. Well, there are these gatherings. Okay, the low-hanging fruit is the World Economic Forum that takes place. We just had it a couple weeks ago in Davos, and I'm going through reviewing a lot of those things because Davos is significant, because this is the Great Reset, the Great Narrative, all of these things fit together. But they're also clearly tied to what goes on in the United Arab Emirates, the World Government Summit. And so here in 2019 at the World Government Summit is, guess who? The head of Davos, Herr Schwab. So Herr Schwab is there, and I want you to listen to this 1-minute clip of him, and you'll see that he picks up, not in the same language as ESG, but he picks up the themes of ESG in this 1-minute clip from a talk he gave at the World Government Summit in 2019.
What does it mean, globalization 4.0? Definitively, it has to be more sustainable. We cannot continue to destroy our environment. It has to be more inclusive. Those people who have lost the hope for a better future, they have to be given a new vision. They don't want to wake up with nightmares. They want to wake up with dreams. We need a more multi-stakeholder globalization, which means a globalization not led just by governments, but where solutions are elaborated jointly by all stakeholders of society.
So there you see, he picked up the 3 things. He said sustainable, that's environmental. He picked up inclusive, that's social. He picked up, he said stakeholder, that's governance. So you see, this is the common theme that's sort of uniting the World Government Summit and the World Economic Forum and the 3rd great global gathering, which is the FII, the Future Investment Initiative Institute. But there's a 4th one, and it's probably the one that's attended by more people than any of the others, maybe all the others combined. And it takes place in St. Petersburg, Russia. It's called SPIEF, St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. They're having a meeting, I think, in less than 2 weeks. They'll be having their 2022 meeting, I was reading through their, they have all these masking and testing requirements that you have to go through if you're going to go in the room and that sort of thing. And so again, this is the 4th. So if there was a trinity of global gatherings, there's actually a 4th one that covers the same topics. And here is one that took place a number of years ago. Here you see Vladimir Putin and Herr Schwab. And also here in 2019, September 2019, they're meeting to discuss things, Schwab and Putin. And Putin's been involved in Davos. And I guess this is, I don't know if Putin got a bunch of extensions for this table, that giant table that he has now that he sits everybody at. But understand that this ESG thing is important to Russia and it's important to Saudi Arabia. For example, when you look at natural gas reserves, who do you see there at the top? You see Russia has the largest natural gas reserves by country. Well, why would they care about ESG? When you look at oil, what do you see? You see Saudi Arabia there, number 2, just behind Venezuela, and there you see number 8 is Russia. And so why would they care about this environmental, social, and governance? They do care. The Soviets pushed this. Environmental, social governance. Corporations are scored on this, and as a result of this, oil and gas developers throughout the world are having trouble getting financing to do more exploration and development, to build refineries and that sort of thing. Now, it doesn't bother Saudi Arabia and Russia if other people aren't developing their oil because they have their oil developed. They have a lot of it in place. So when you see these things, like what you see, here's somebody at Love that bought 173 gallons of diesel, and it was $1,000. You see gas prices going up. I mean, you see these pictures every day. But who's benefiting from these increase in prices right now? Because people aren't pumping oil around the world. Look, a Ukraine war has a lot to do with it, and sanctions against Russia have a lot to do with it. But the rest of the world is scrambling to get oil supply and demand, less supply, and you have the demand, the price goes up. And so Russia and Saudi Arabia are just reaping a huge windfall from all of these sanctions and that sort of thing, and ESG. Now, let me talk just briefly about exactly what's going on with why is Saudi Arabia involved in these talks with Israel. Part of this relates to a thing called the Straits of Tiran, T-I-R-A-N, which is at the southern end of the Gulf of Aqaba. So here on the left, you see the Sinai Peninsula here, and you see Saudi Arabia here, and then Jordan would be up here, and then a lot would be here at the north end of the Gulf of Aqaba. I'll explain to you what happened. So Neom is a city that they call the Line. I'll show you a video about that in just a moment. So why are the Straits of Tiran important? Well, back in 1967, Egypt had taken control of these 2 islands that you see at the end of the Straits of Tiran, at the southern end. There used to be Saudi, and Nasser came in and he said, we're going to take control of, we're going to blockade Israel from using the Gulf of Aqaba. So one of Israel's major ports is in Eilat, and they could not come in and out of the Red Sea. It's a convenient port because ships can go there without having to go through the Suez Canal. And of course, within a few weeks, this led to the 6-Day War, which Israel won in a stunning victory. And they took control of the Sinai Peninsula. They took control of the entire area west of the Jordan River. Before that, that area around Jerusalem that's gray there in the map, that had been controlled by Jordan. So there were peace talks that took place. The defeat was so humiliating that Nasser resigned as the dictator of Egypt. I'm going to relieve myself of all positions. I'm just going to go live like a normal person. It was an incredibly humiliating defeat. Well, what happened was that within an hour of him resigning, There were massive demonstrations around Cairo, all over Egypt, saying, "Come back, Nasser, come back. We love you, we love you, we love you." And he came back and ruled Egypt until he passed away, when he was succeeded by Anwar Sadat. Sadat decided that he wanted to make peace with Israel, so we had the thing called the Camp David Accords, led by Jimmy Carter, Menachem Begin, Anwar Sadat, and in 1979 they entered into this peace agreement. Well, part of the peace agreement was that the Straits, or the Gulf of Aqaba, Egypt would always guarantee that that would be accessible to Israel. Well, in recent years, what they've done, though, is that Egypt has decided to give those islands that are here at the head of the Strait of Tiran back to Saudi Arabia. Now, they haven't finalized that yet, but because there's this guarantee that Israel will have access to the Gulf of Aqaba, the Saudis have to make some arrangement, accommodation with Israel with regard to access to the Gulf of Aqaba. So Israel sees this as a way to achieve some peace with Saudi Arabia. Very fascinating. And also, because there is this place that the city, it's called the Line, it's a long, narrow city that Mohammed bin Salman, is one of his visions that he has, is to build this city called Neom. Now, some have suggested that Neom might be the final Babylon, commercial Babylon of Bible prophecy. It'll be a city of about 1 million people. It's got a lot of things. And so, as part of his 2030 vision, this is what Mohammed bin Salman said: "I present to you the Line, a city of 1 million residents with a length of 170 kilometers that preserves 95% of nature within Neom, with 0 cars, 0 streets, and 0 carbon emissions." So you see, this is the ESG. And they estimate it'll be 1 million or more people when they get it built. They've already started to build some of it. I'll show you some pictures of that. But part of that is you can see the islands here that are at the ones that Egypt is controlling but wants to give back to Saudi Arabia. So this is a report from the Jerusalem Post last week that Israel and Saudis are trying to finalize some sort of agreement, and part of that agreement will allow commercial airlines to overfly Saudi Arabia. This is a big deal. This has never happened. Right now, there can be commercial flights to the United Arab Emirates, and I think one other place, but otherwise they have to fly all the way around Saudi Arabia. So they're going to grant commercial overflight rights to El Al, to Israeli airlines, to fly over Saudi Arabian airspace. This is a big deal. It's very unusual when Trump came to Israel in 2017 that he had put in place that he flew from Riyadh to Jerusalem, or to Tel Aviv. That was unusual. That just didn't happen. So it says here, in return, Saudi Arabia will allow Israeli airlines to fly over its airspace. Currently, only Israeli flights to the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain can fly over Saudi Arabia, which are part of the Abraham Accords, which I think almost everybody agrees that unless Mohammed bin Salman gave his blessings to this, this would never have occurred. So this is a very fascinating thing. So here's a video that explains to you what this Neom city is look like. It's going to be about a $500 billion investment. It's incredibly expensive. When it first came out, everybody said they can't afford this. They could just never afford this. So here in 2017 at the FII Institute meeting in Riyadh, Mohammed bin Salman laid out his plans. But now it's affordable because the price of gas and oil has gone way up, and Saudi Arabia has almost the most oil on the planet. But look at this, ideally situated at the crossroads of the world. This is, in his vision, this is a very big deal. You see here the red represents the shipping routes that go right by Neom. A lot of it up on the ground surface will be largely a park type area for pedestrians, and everything else will be done underneath the street, cars and trains and public transportation and that sort of thing. So it's very much like people had these visions that they would build Brasilia in Brazil as the new capital of Brazil. But the other interesting thing is this thing goes across or near Jabal al-Lawz, which a lot of people, and I tend to believe this way myself, that this may actually be the Mount Sinai of the Bible, where Moses got the law from the Lord, from God. And so this is a big deal. So Lapid, he's asked about, what are you doing with regard to the Saudis? And he says, well, we're taking baby steps. We think that we're going to get there. Been a lot of articles in Jerusalem Post and elsewhere about, we need to get this done. And it's kind of interesting that where this article in the Jerusalem Post starts off with this. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos this week, Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan said that the integration of Israel in the region will be a huge benefit not only for Israel but for the entire region, but without addressing the core problems of the Palestinian people and granting respect and sovereignty to the Palestinian people through the establishment of a Palestinian state, the instability and threats to Israel's security and the entire region's security will continue. We have always seen normalization as the end result for a path to peace. And this echoes what the Saudi kings have wanted. But now we may have a new Saudi king that may have a different opinion of it. So here's another article from Jerusalem Post. Ruthie Bloom writes about Blinken's immoral equivalence. Just again, it was in Friday's Jerusalem Post last week. She says U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken seems to think that his job entails creating moral equivalence where it doesn't exist. The way in which he approaches Palestinian Authority aggression against Israel is a prime example. In fairness to Blinken, he was appointed to toe the line of U.S. President Joe Biden and the crew behind him. Luckily for all concerned, other than the Jewish state, America's top diplomat possesses the right ideological outlook and ambition to fulfill the task with little effort. The only pushback he encounters emanates from the squad Democrats and their apologists. And I'll talk some more about that on Sunday. So, the senior House Democrats have come out just recently and urged Biden to recalibrate his ties with Saudi Arabia. Now, some of these Democrats, they don't like Saudi Arabia because of the Jamal Khashoggi affair. But I think you're going to see Mohammed bin Salman sort of brought back into everybody's good graces, or the fact that everybody can tolerate him, despite what happened to Khashoggi and people blaming Mohammed bin Salman for that. All's going to be forgotten. And so but some of the Democrats, they don't want to give up on this because they view Mohammed bin Salman as kind of having had a relationship with Trump or Kushner, and they don't like that. It's an article, this is the last one I'll refer to in this update, which ended up being longer than I thought it would be. Real and the Saudis. This is by David Weinberg. Now, David Weinberg is associated with the Israeli Defense and Security Forum, which is a group of retired Israeli defense people that really support the Jewish state. But it's kind of interesting. I'll just read for you the couple paragraphs of what he said in his article, and I believe this is from last Friday's Jerusalem Post. Real and the Saudis. Biden must support the Abraham Accords and bring Riyadh into the regional peace revolution. But listen to how his view has changed with Mohammed bin Salman. And so you can say this is a significant change in people's thinking as to what's going on here. And I think this all plays into Bible prophecy. So I think it's something that at a minimum we need to be watching. But listen to what David Weinberg says. And I love David Weinberg stuff. In 2017, I published an essay in this newspaper warning that Israel should not bear hug the problematic Saudis, nor fall prey to the overenthusiastic fantasies about peace with Riyadh. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, I wrote, is not the answer to Israel's prayer in facing down Iran, and he will demand down payments to the Palestinians as the upfront price for mere lukewarm Saudi openness to Israel. I remind readers that, for all its legendary wealth, Saudi Arabia is a failed state with tribal divisions, zealously rigid religious leaders, and Byzantine family oligarchic enmities. all of which could coalesce to thwart the social, religious, and diplomatic reforms that MBS is almost single-handedly seeking to implement. Well, I was wrong about MBS, Mr. Weinberg writes, and his new Saudi Arabia. Over the past 2 years, the sand curtain has fallen, leading to the Abraham Accords peace agreements between Israel and the Gulf Arab states. None of this would have happened without a green light from Riyadh. None of the insanely swift, skyrocketing trade and defense agreements between Israel and the Gulf states would have been possible without Saudi assent and without hundreds of direct flights every month between Israel and Arabian Gulf states traversing Saudi airspace. Just this week, the United Arab Emirates and Israel signed a free trade agreement expected to push the value of UAE-Israel non-oil bilateral trade beyond $10 billion within 5 years. There were numerous reports of growing Saudi-Israeli business ties and public acknowledgement of the high-level Israeli visits, including the defense minister, to Riyadh in recent years. Apparently, dozens of Israeli executives have been allowed to enter Saudi Arabia using their Israeli passports instead of being required to use second passports from other countries, as had long been the practice. Meanwhile, a private equity fund run by Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of the former President Donald Trump, who led negotiations on the Abraham Accords, has arranged a deal to invest millions of dollars, it's actually billions of dollars, from Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund in Israeli startups, according to the Wall Street Journal. Last month, the Saudis hosted a multi-faith conference on common values among the followers of religions. This is Saudi Arabia holding this, in which Rabbi David Rosen and 9 other Orthodox rabbis participated, and kosher food was served. Rosen is the International Director of Interreligious Affairs for the American Jewish Committee, based in Jerusalem. His Israeli identity was widely known and prominently acknowledged. Most amazing of all is that Israel and Bahrain now have a defense cooperation agreement. So in other words, what you see is you're seeing a very significant thing change. But the question is, what does it all mean? And I think it's just something we need to be very, very aware of, because if you put this in the context of Psalm 83, and if Psalm 83 does show the conditions of how people think in the background, this is an area that I believe Israel needs to be concerned about. And how far this goes is anybody's guess at this time, but I think it's something that we need to be paying attention to. So that's my update. ESG, Saudi Arabia, ESG, and the Abraham Accords, and some of the significant developments there. But understand that one of the big pushers of ESG, which is making you pay more for gas, is Saudi Arabia. One of the big pushers of ESG, and there's a lot of reports that the Russians have been funding groups that push ESG here in the United States. And so Russia gets a benefit from that. They get turmoil in the United States. It hurts American business, and it increases the price of gas and oil, so they can charge more. So they make more money from it. So just understand that this is all very tightly interwoven together. And so when you see Davos, World Economic Forum, you see the World Government Summit, you see the FII Institute, and you see the St. Petersburg International and Economic Forum, it seems like they're all working together. So we'll be paying attention to this. So we'll talk more about some of these things on Sunday and some of the things. Thanks for listening. Oh, please, if you can, subscribe, like. It does help us. We're getting shadow banned pretty significantly on YouTube. We're also on other platforms, Rumble, Real FBC, Brighteon, Fellowship Bible Chapel, Remnant Truth Network, rtntv.org. You can get the app there and watch the updates there. So anyway, appreciate you listening. Talk to you on Sunday.